At my sister's wedding, my mom whispered, "Don't embarrass us tonight." So I stood up and exposed every lie they'd ever told. They say weddings bring families together. But for me, Molly's wedding felt more like a final exam I hadn't studied for, just one long setup waiting for me to fail. When the invitation came, tucked inside a rose gold envelope with embossed lettering, it didn't feel like an olive branch. It felt like bait. My younger sister Molly was getting married, and I, the black sheep of the family, was being summoned not out of love, but out of necessity or perhaps obligation. When I told my best friend Tasha about the invitation, she raised an eyebrow and immediately said, "They want something. That woman doesn't do anything unless there's something in it for her." She meant my mother, Carol, of course, the queen of control, curator of family myths, and the reason I moved out at 17 with 2 garbage bags of clothes and $100 in tips from my job waiting tables. Carol had perfected the art of public charm, smiling so warmly at PDA meetings and church fundraisers that people would defend her long after she walked away, never suspecting the emotional wreckage she left behind at home. I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 2 years, not since the fallout at Christmas, when my mom asked me to leave before dessert because my energy was making everyone uncomfortable. Translation: I didn't pretend to enjoy Molly's engagement story, which was recited like scripture over dinner, complete with giggles, fake surprise, and references to things only Molly's inner circle would understand. The same inner circle I had been deliberately excluded from since I was 15 years old. At 32, I made peace with being the outsider. I have a quiet life I built myself, a steady job in graphic design, and a rent-controlled apartment that smells like lavender and wood polish. I no longer crave their approval, but that doesn't mean I don't notice the hole where something warm should have been. So when the invitation arrived, I stared at it for a long time, flipping it over like it might hold a secret message. Eventually, I put it on my fridge under a magnet shaped like a lobster claw and left it there for a week, unsure whether attending would give me closure or just reopen old wounds. The phone call came 3 days before the wedding. My mother's voice was as clipped as ever, businesslike, with that tinge of disapproval that had flavored every interaction between us for as long as I could remember. She didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on how long it had been, didn't even pause before saying, "You're still coming to the wedding, right? It's important that everyone is there. Just please, don't make things difficult." I almost laughed. Don't make things difficult? I hadn't said a word to them in 2 years, and somehow I was still the problem. I said I'd be there, though, not because she asked, and certainly not because I cared about Molly's big day. I was going for myself, for the teenage girl who never got to explain why she didn't steal from her sister's wallet, for the 20-year-old version of me who cried in her college dorm room after her parents cut her off for choosing therapy over family. I went for every version of me that had been twisted into something unrecognizable by their stories. Tasha offered to come with me. She'd known my family since junior high and was the only person who remembered all the details, not just the pretty picture Carol tried to paint. "Think of me as your emotional security blanket," she said, stuffing snacks into her clutch as we walked to my car. "I'll yank you out if anyone so much as breathed passive-aggressively in your direction." The wedding venue was a converted barn outside town, the kind that looked rustic but cost a fortune to book. I arrived in a navy blue dress and flat shoes. No heels, no Spanx, no illusions. I told myself I would be neutral, quiet, maybe even kind. I didn't want drama. But all of that vanished the second I walked past the flower arch and saw my mother standing with a flute of champagne and a face that barely moved when she looked at me. She didn't hug me, didn't smile. Instead, she leaned in like she was about to share a secret and whispered, "Don't embarrass us tonight." That was it. No hello. No thank you for coming. Just a warning. A threat, wrapped in perfume and expectation. Something in me snapped right then, not in a dramatic, screaming sort of way. More like a lock clicking open after years of pressure. I nodded, as if I agreed, then walked toward the seating area with Tasha trailing behind me. eyes wide with disbelief. "I cannot believe she actually said that," she muttered under her breath. "Do they think you're going to flip a table or something?" Honestly, I didn't know what they thought. Maybe they assumed I'd disappear again after the wedding, or maybe they believed I'd accept whatever scraps of civility they handed me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small around them. I felt strangely powerful, like I had nothing to lose, and that was more dangerous than any speech I could have rehearsed. The ceremony started late. Molly made her grand entrance in a backless lace dress that probably cost more than my car. Everyone stood. Phones clicked. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. And I sat there, watching her walk down the aisle like she owned the entire world, and I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even sad. I was ready. Molly's wedding was exactly what I expected. Polished, curated, and shallow in all the ways that made Carol beam with pride. Everything looked like it had been pulled from a bridal magazine, down to the matching pastel macarons and the towering floral centerpieces that probably cost half a semester of college tuition. Guests smiled like their jaws were glued, nodding along to toasts filled with fluff, avoiding any conversation that might veer into sincerity or memory. Everyone was there to perform, not to connect, and definitely not to remember the parts of our past that didn't fit the script. I sat through the ceremony like a guest at a play I'd already seen too many times, pretending to care about the vows that felt borrowed from Pinterest and slightly edited for grammar. When Molly said forever, I wondered if she remembered the guy before Zach, the one she cheated on with his coworker and then blamed me when the truth came out. I had been home from college for winter break, and she convinced our parents I'd accidentally let it slip to his sister. Carol believed her immediately, of course, because the version of me in her head was always reckless, jealous, and just unstable enough to be ignored. That Christmas was the first time I realized Molly wasn't just a favorite. She was the investment. Every family event, every photo, every story was designed to make her shine, and I was expected to quietly applaud from the background, holding my tongue while they passed around their myths like family heirlooms. When I tried to defend myself, Carol told me, "Don't be petty, Jenna. You're older. Be the bigger person." Translation: let Molly lie. Let us pretend. At the reception, I sat at a table labeled Extended Family, even though two people there were barely related and another was a co-worker of the groom. Tasha rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "They're not even pretending you're part of the inner circle," she whispered, sipping her wine with a practiced smile. "You're here, but they want you invisible." It wasn't new, but still stung. I scanned the crowd and saw Molly laughing with a group of bridesmaids. Her face lit up like a stage light, basking in the glow of admiration. She was always good at pretending nothing was wrong. I once watched her fake cry through an apology to a teacher while texting under the desk. Meanwhile, I'd spent 3 months grounded in high school for allegedly plagiarizing an essay that she actually copied from an old yearbook binder because she didn't realize it counted. The photographer passed by, asking for all family of the bride, and before I could stand, Carol caught my eye and gave a slight shake of her head. "Not now. Not you." So I stayed seated. Tasha put her hand over mine beneath the tablecloth. "You don't need their permission to exist," she whispered. "But maybe they need a reminder that you do." I excused myself and walked toward the garden patio, needing air. The lanterns overhead glowed warm against the evening sky, and for a moment, I considered just leaving. No one would notice. That had always been the irony, how loudly they wanted me silent, and how little they'd miss me when I complied. But before I could leave, I heard someone call my name. Brent, my cousin. We used to build forts together at Grandma's house before time and loyalty turned him into a stranger. He approached cautiously, holding 2 drinks. "I brought you a whiskey," he said. "Figured you'd need it." I took the glass, unsure what this gesture meant. "So," he added, "what are you planning tonight?" "Tasha said you looked like you were about to burn the place down." I raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" He smirked. "Only to people who know what you've been through." I paused. Do they know? I asked. About the money? About the letters? Brent's face stiffened. No. And maybe let's not go there, Jenna. It's Molly's wedding. Don't make it about the past. My grip tightened around the glass. But it is about the past. It's always been. They built this entire illusion on burying everything they did to me. And you want me to play along? He sighed. Look, I get it. I do. But no one's going to thank you if you start digging up bones during the speeches. I stared at him for a long moment. I'm not looking for thanks, I said. I'm just tired of pretending I'm the villain when I've been the only one telling the truth. Brent looked away. Some people aren't ready for the truth. Then maybe they shouldn't have invited me, I replied. I remember the night I found the letter from my grandmother, the one that named me as a beneficiary, the one Carol swore never existed. She said Nana left everything to Molly because she was more responsible. But the truth was tucked in a fireproof box at the bottom of the hallway closet, behind a stack of old tax returns. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for extra towels and found a lie big enough to crack the floor under my feet. While I confronted her, she didn't flinch. You wouldn't have known what to do with the money anyway, she said. You were still making minimum wage. I was 24. That money could have paid for my master's program. Instead, it paid for Molly's destination bachelorette party in Napa. They toasted her over rose and told stories about what a good heart she had, while I worked double shifts and skipped meals to cover rent. And it wasn't just money. It was the little ways I was erased. The family portrait without me in it, taken the year I lived 2 cities away, but never got the invite. The church bulletin praising the proud parents of 2 wonderful daughters, though Carol only sent in photos of Molly. The birthdays forgotten. The secrets told to everyone but me. I could have forgiven the favoritism. I couldn't forgive the lies. So when the final toast was given and the clinking of glasses died down, I stood. I didn't ask. I didn't wait for approval. I walked to the microphone with the quiet confidence of someone who has survived being unloved by the people who were supposed to love her most. Zach looked confused. Molly blinked rapidly. Carol sat very still, her smile frozen like a porcelain mask. I tapped the mic and looked around the room. Most of you know me as Molly's sister, I began. Some of you don't know me at all. That's not an accident. For years, I was the story they left out. But tonight, I'd like to tell mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room fell quiet, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of their silence. Let them hear me. There was a strange freedom in finally saying what I had swallowed for over a decade, an unsettling kind of peace that came from letting the silence collapse under its own weight. My hands weren't shaking. My voice didn't waver. I looked each one of them in the eye as I spoke, unbothered by the discomfort twisting across their carefully curated expressions. I didn't need their validation anymore. I only needed to reclaim the space they spent years denying me. I know I wasn't supposed to speak tonight, I said, but I wasn't supposed to be invisible either. Since we're all here celebrating love and honesty, I figured it was time someone practiced both. I saw Molly shift uncomfortably, her hand brushing Zach's arm like she was grounding herself, as if this moment would pass like every other moment where I eventually backed down. Not this time. You all know the version of me that was whispered about over casseroles and cocktails. I continued. The one who was too sensitive, too rebellious, too difficult to invite to family barbecues. But you don't know what was said behind closed doors. You don't know how many times I was lied about so someone else could stay clean. You don't know how often I stayed silent because I thought it would keep the peace. The room held still, not frozen in politeness, but in genuine pause. I think some of them expected me to go off the rails, to rant or cry or scream. But instead, I laid it out like a legal case, measured, methodical, and undeniable. Remember when my college fund suddenly disappeared? I asked. They told you I spent it recklessly. But the truth is, the money was never lost. It was rerouted. It paid for Molly's emergency tuition when she failed half her credits her sophomore year, and no one wanted to admit it. I watched Carol's hand tighten around her glass. She didn't deny it. She didn't move, just stared, unmoving, like a statue someone forgot to dust. Remember when I stopped coming to holidays? I said, that wasn't rebellion. That was self-preservation. I stopped showing up after being told my anxiety was a burden on the atmosphere, and that my presence made people walk on eggshells. I spent years thinking I was broken when really I was just inconvenient. A few guests looked down at their napkins. Others glanced at Molly, who now were the kind of forced smile you use when posing for a photo you didn't want to be in. Zach, though, was staring at me, really staring, like someone trying to connect dots he didn't know were part of the same picture. I turned toward him because he deserved the truth too. Zach, I don't know you well, but if you've been told that I'm jealous, petty, or dramatic, I'd ask you to consider who benefits from that story being true. Because when Molly cheated on her ex-fiancé, I didn't out her. I covered for her. I lied to his family. And then she turned around and let me take the blame when it all fell apart. A whisper broke out across the room. Someone gasped. Tasha sat straighter at our table. Brent looked like he'd been slapped. And when our grandmother died, I said, she left a letter naming me as the primary recipient of her estate. That letter never made it to me. Carol said it didn't exist, but I found it, tucked in a fireproof box next to a folder labeled inconvenient paperwork. The money was already gone by then. It funded a trip to Italy. I got a postcard. I could feel the air tighten. The energy shifted. Carol tried to speak, but no words came out. Molly finally stood. Okay, I think that's enough, she said, her voice brittle. This is not the place. Then what is the place? I said, turning fully toward her. You got a wedding. You got a speech. You got a life built on burying every truth that didn't serve your version of reality. I got silence. I got erasure. And I'm done playing along. The officiant stepped forward awkwardly, but Zach raised a hand. Let her finish, he said. That was when I knew the facade had cracked for good. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, I said. I came because for once in my life, I wanted to say the truth out loud and let it stand, even if it shakes things. Especially if it shakes things. Because I deserve more than to be edited out of my own family. I stepped back from the mic. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then Renee, my aunt, stood up and began clapping. Slowly, deliberately, one by one, a few others followed. It wasn't thunderous, and it wasn't unanimous. But it was real. Carol's face was pale. Molly was speechless. Zach was looking at her with something I can only describe as disbelief, maybe even betrayal. I turned to Tasha. She was already on her feet, her eyes glassy but proud. You did it, she whispered. You finally did it. I didn't stay for cake. I didn't stay for cleanup. I walked out into the night with my head held high and the weight finally lifted. I didn't burn the place down. I just lit a match and let the truth do the rest. Later, I heard people murmuring in the parking lot. Some in support, some in shock, some trying to spin what just happened as a breakdown, because it was easier to question my emotions than to examine their own complicity. But I didn't care. I knew what I said was true, and I knew the room heard it. Whether they chose to believe it or not wasn't my burden anymore. Tasha and I sat in the car with the engine off for a few minutes, just breathing. The silence between us was the good kind, the kind that holds everything without needing to speak it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't just defend yourself, she said. You reclaimed the narrative. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't replay the speech in my head for flaws or regrets. Instead, I slept deeply for the first time in months, like my body finally believed I was safe from the performance, from the pretending, from the psychological weight of being the designated family scapegoat. The next morning, I woke up to a string of text messages, some from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, some anonymous numbers asking if the things I said were true, some from Molly that I deleted without reading. Carol didn't write. She never does when she can't control the story. But there was one message I reread 3 times. It was from Zach. Thanks for saying what you did. I had a feeling. You confirmed it. I'm not mad. I'm awake. I sat with that message for a long time. Not because I needed his validation, but because it was proof that truth, even if delivered at the wrong time, can still land exactly where it needs to. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to stop being erased. And finally I had. The irony of it all settled over me as I made coffee. How they'd spent years trying to silence me, only to give me the perfect stage and a microphone. All they had to do was leave me alone, let me heal, maybe apologize once. Instead, they pushed, prodded, paraded their version of the truth in front of me one too many times, and now the curtain had dropped. No more pretending. Some stories are messy, uncomfortable, unflattering, but they are still true. And sometimes, telling them out loud is the only way to be free. The week after the wedding felt like an emotional hangover, not in the dramatic sense of regret or shame, but in the quiet, sobering way you feel after your body finally exhales after years of holding its breath. I hadn't planned for what would come after. I wasn't seeking revenge or applause. I just needed the truth to exist outside of my own chest, where it had festered for so long I almost forgot it was real. On Monday morning, I walked into work like nothing had happened, answering emails, updating project timelines, reviewing mock-ups, pretending not to notice the anxiety still lingering in my shoulders. But every few hours, a new message would pop up, an old friend from church, a distant cousin, even one of my old teachers. They had heard, and more than a few of them said the same thing. I always wondered what really happened. Tasha called midweek to check in. She didn't ask how I was because she already knew. She just listened while I vented about the weird blend of numbness and clarity I was experiencing, how the weight of finally speaking up was both lighter and heavier than I imagined it would be. That's what truth does, she said. It doesn't clean up the mess. It just gives you the broom. I wasn't surprised when Carol finally reached out. It came in the form of a 3-sentence email sent at 2:17 a.m., subject line blank. Message typed in her usual clipped phrasing like she was writing a memo instead of addressing her daughter. You made a scene. People are talking. I hope you're satisfied. I didn't respond. I just archived it and moved on because I had already learned that her version of love only came with conditions, and I was no longer interested in paying the price of admission. What had surprised me was the message from Zach later that week. This time, it wasn't a single line. It was a full paragraph, thoughtful and clear. He thanked me again. He said he had questions, not just about Molly, but about everything. He said he'd started noticing small inconsistencies, things that didn't make sense, stories that contradicted themselves when he replayed them in his head. I didn't want to believe it, he wrote, but deep down, I knew something was off. You just confirmed what I was too afraid to ask. I didn't tell him what to do. That wasn't my place. But I told him I respected him for listening, and I meant it. It takes more courage to hear a hard truth than it does to keep living inside a soft lie. The following Sunday, I got a call from Aunt Renee. She'd been quiet during the chaos, watching from her usual distance, careful not to pick sides too publicly. But now, her voice was steady and calm, and she told me that what I did was brave and necessary. Your mom did the same thing to me when we were younger, she said. She just never expected anyone to call her out in front of a crowd. We talked for over an hour. She told me stories I had never heard, about the way Carol manipulated their parents, how she had always shaped narratives to cast herself in the best light. She's never been challenged like that before, Renee said, and I think she's unraveling because of it. Still, I wasn't interested in her unraveling. I wasn't invested in her guilt. I didn't want her to fall apart. I just wanted her to stop pretending she hadn't broken anything. Molly, of course, tried to spin the story. Photos from the wedding started appearing online with cheerful captions and strategically cropped smiles, the kind of image management Carol had mastered and passed down like an inheritance. But beneath the surface, the cracks were spreading. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Zach had postponed the honeymoon indefinitely. He was staying with a friend. He needed space. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot. I didn't send, "I told you so" text to anyone. Because that wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about exposing Molly to ruin her. It was about refusing to be buried so she could shine. That distinction mattered to me more than anyone would ever understand. The silence from Carol became its own kind of message. No calls, no apologies, no attempts at reparation. She believed if she ignored me long enough, the problem would go away. But I was done being her problem. I had become my own solution. Then, something unexpected happened. Brent reached out. He wanted to talk. At first, I ignored his call. But then he sent a message that read, "I was wrong. Can we meet?" So I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop on a Wednesday afternoon where the chairs wobbled and the coffee tasted like burnt almonds, but it was neutral ground. He sat down and looked older than I remembered, like a man who had aged 5 years in 5 days. I knew some of it, he admitted. Not all of it, but enough to know I should have said something sooner. I nodded. I wasn't interested in punishing him. I just wanted honesty. "You were scared," I said. "I get it. It's hard to go against the current when you've been swimming in it your whole life." He looked away for a second, then back at me. "I don't want to keep pretending, and I don't want my kids to grow up thinking silence is strength." That hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because I wish someone had said that to me when I was little. Maybe because it meant something was changing. I walked out of that coffee shop lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. And slowly, piece by piece, people were starting to see the truth not as a betrayal, but as a necessary correction. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Carol would ever acknowledge what she'd done. I didn't know if Molly's marriage would survive. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They couldn't rewrite me anymore. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in over a year. I wrote down every word I had spoken at the wedding, not because I was afraid of forgetting, but because I never wanted to minimize it later. I wanted a record, a version untouched by anyone else's memory. The rawness of it, the clarity, the tone of my voice when I finally stopped apologizing. I wanted to look back one day and say, this is where I took my name back. For most of my life, I had learned to edit myself for their comfort. Speak softly. Avoid confrontation. Don't make your mother look bad. Don't challenge Molly's version of events. Don't be difficult. But none of those rules protected me. They only protected the lie. Now, I felt a new rule settling into my bones. Tell the truth, even when it shakes the table. And if the table breaks, build a better one. The next weekend, I went to visit the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I hadn't been there in years, partly out of resentment, partly out of guilt. I brought fresh flowers, yellow tulips, her favorite, and sat cross-legged beside the stone, feeling the breeze thread through my hair like a reminder that time passes whether we heal or not. "I did it, Nana," I said aloud, though no one was around to hear. I told the truth. I didn't let them bury me with it. I don't know if she would have been proud, but I like to think she would have understood. Before I left, I placed a small stone on top of her headstone, a habit I picked up from a friend who told me it meant remembrance. Not just that someone visited, but that they remembered who you really were. I pressed it down gently and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting me." Then I turned and I walked forward. It's been nearly 3 months since that night. And still, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night unsure whether I really said all those things out loud, or if it was just a long, lucid dream that my subconscious created to give me closure I didn't believe I could ever earn. But then I see the journal, or I reread Zach's message, or I open my inbox and find another quiet thank you from someone who had their own Carol. And I remember, I really did say it. I really did stand up. And they can never take that back. Life didn't transform overnight. There was no sudden apology tour, no hand-delivered flowers, no tearful reunions on the porch. This wasn't the end of a movie. It was just my real life, still full of small, complicated days and quiet resistance. Carol hasn't reached out again. Molly, I've heard, is trying to smooth things over with Zach's family, though for what I gather, the fracture hasn't healed. I don't wish her pain, but I won't protect her from the truth either. That's what got us into this mess in the first place, protecting the people who needed exposure, not excuses. Brent and I talk more now. Not daily, but real conversations, the kind that don't edit out the uncomfortable parts. He told me he brought my name up to his parents, said it was time to stop pretending the family history didn't have chapters that were ripped out on purpose. Tasha and I have become even closer. She says watching me speak at the wedding changed something for her too, that it reminded her not to shrink herself just because the room isn't ready for her light. Sometimes when I walk past a mirror, I catch a glimpse of someone I barely recognize. Not because she's changed, but because for the first time, I'm seeing her without the fog of other people's expectations blurring the lines. I used to think I needed my mother to approve of me, or my sister to include me, or my father to defend me just once. But now I understand something far more important. I never needed any of them to make me whole. I just needed to stop believing that their version of me was the only one that mattered. I'm not the angry daughter. I'm not the jealous sister. I'm not the black sheep. I'm just Jenna, and I told the truth. Finally, last week, I walked by the same wedding venue on my way to a design consult. The flower arch was gone, replaced by seasonal lights and new signage, but the air still held that polished, manicured scent of curated joy. I stopped for a moment at the gate, not out of nostalgia, but acknowledgement. That version of me, the one who stepped through that arch 3 months ago, was still part of me, but she had transformed. Back then, I carried decades of unsaid things like anchors in my chest, afraid that releasing them would only drown me faster. Now, I understood that sometimes saying things out loud is the only way to make them lose their power. I don't know what comes next. I'm not naive enough to think one moment heals everything. But I know this. I'll never sit in silence again to protect someone else's lie. I'll never let someone tell my story for me while I shrink in the background of their highlight reel. The freedom didn't come from hurting them. It came from choosing myself in front of them, out loud, without apology. And that version of me? She's never going back. People ask if I'd do it again. If I'd speak up knowing it would shatter the illusion and cost me whatever brutal connection still existed between us. My answer is simple. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because the illusion was never protection. It was a cage. And truth, no matter how messy, is the only thing that's ever set me free.